Hello and welcome to another episode of Fantasy Football Science. I'm DLP, here to improve our fantasy football process. This is my second video only of 2023, and in the first one, I kind of introduced my new process for approaching fantasy football this year. It's a more scientific approach using standards that we use to teach science to students, and adapting it to fantasy football in the hopes of just bettering our process in general. I think approaching fantasy football from a scientific perspective, or at least from a scientist perspective, um, should lead to more success. And I talked about in the last video how, um, the tenets and the standards and all of the practices and the processes involved with three-dimensional teaching or three-dimensional learning when it comes to science, I think applies outside of the classroom, making students hopefully better citizens post high school. But I also think it can apply here, since it naturally can apply outside of just the confines of science and scientific teachings. I think one of the ways it can apply is right here in Success with Fantasy Football, which I know sounds insane. But I'm talking myself through this. Once again, if you want to find what I've adapted as the three-dimensional or the three dimensions of fantasy football, the link to that Google Doc will be in the description of this video. If you're here, might as well like and subscribe. I'm planning to do more videos. Like I said in the last video, I thought about doing some editing, but there's just no time. So today we're going to continue the process using three dimensions of fantasy football here, whether that's practices, knowledge, or ways of thinking. We're going to use all three. Last time I did a Underdog Best Ball Mania 4 draft, and there were three different dimensions that I think applied to that process of doing a draft. And now we're going to look at ADP as of May 19th. And we're going to kind of assess where we think some miscalculations are in terms of ADP. So some connections from the last video, and you can see right here, we're still going to be talking about ADP. It's something that I switched on last year, being more ADP oriented and not falling into like singular player takes and more falling into assessing prices of certain players, not sticking to player takes, but more sticking to price takes. And that's been kind of hard to do for me this year, because last year it was just kind of like, let's see what happens. And I was still a little bit kind of tied down to, okay, I think this player is going to be good, probably where my process fell off in certain areas. Like, for example, Matt Ryan, he was a guy I was in on and just didn't seem to work out. So this year, it feels weird to now all of a sudden have certain players, that I felt about last year, have those completely change. I almost feel like I don't have a consensus guy, group of guys that I like. Maybe at the top here, Bijan, I'm kind of in on, Jamar, JJ, CMC. I mean, I like all the way up to Hill. The first and second round is not really that crazy to me. It's when we start getting into the later rounds where I find some miscalculations, or at least what I tend to notice. So we're going to be obviously obtaining, analyzing, and interpreting data / information. This is something I started last year as well, this ADP draft board. I like to kind of just take Underdog's ADP and put it into, just a mock draft board just to see visually where players go. It just helps me, I think, understand misprices in ADP and just look at ADP from a different perspective in order to better assess prices and better find those miscalculations. It's just another way to find patterns, which is one of the things, a cross-cutting concept, patterns that you could argue we would be using here. Notice how we use multiple in one exercise. So we're going to be, interpreting this data, this information. We've obtained it, right? There's no questions about the sources of the of the ADP. It's straight from Underdog itself. But the big thing we're going to be looking at here, I think, one of the most common themes is systems. Now, you notice the logo here is the Earth rotating there. I love systems as a way of thinking. And in science, an example of systems would be like a food web. We don't have a food chain in the real world. We have a food web, and it's defined by multiple different characters with, multiple different organisms within an environment, and each one having an effect, whether that's indirectly or directly on the other organisms or animals or whatever you say, um, uh, in the ecosystem. And so when we have multiple organisms that provide a huge benefit to the ecosystem, the more and more we have, the more stable that ecosystem is. It's like, the more chains that you have in the, or links that you have in the chain fence, or the armor, the more stable that armor could be. And so instead of thinking, you got to think of teams now as, what's their system like? How many, not necessarily like their offensive or their defensive system, but like personnel wise, from top to bottom, what's their, you could go as deep as you want. What's their GM like? What's their coach like? What's the, how many good players do they have on the offensive line, the wide receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks, all of it. And for me, I think the more and more quality pieces that you have, the better your system can be. Now, of course, the types of plays that are called, the offensive scheme, the defensive scheme, that stuff matters too, I think, to player success. But that's kind of the idea here, is that a system, a team, is built of multiple parts. And we want to, I think it's a good process to acquire players that are in good systems. And when you have good systems, you just have good teams, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that the team that was successful last year, or the system that was successful last year, is the same system this next year. So I'm not saying that you have to buy into good teams, and that is an argument that you should buy into good teams. But I think we can find miscalculations in perceptions of teams by the general consensus, right? Certain teams that I think are going to perform better than the expected, simply because we can identify the types of systems that they have in place currently. So the first place I'll start here is with Breece Hall. In the third round here, let me first talk about why I like Breece Hall and why I think his ADP is lowered. The only reason his ADP is lowered is because of injury knowledge. Now, that's one of our fantasy football fundamentals there. Understanding injuries, I think, is very, very important. You shouldn't just be afraid of injuries, right? It shouldn't be like, oh, this player is injured, I'm going to avoid, and every time I'm going to be rewarded for avoiding said player with injury. I'm not an injury expert, but I do follow certain people, certain injury analysts that do this for a living and have done, professional medical stuff for a living before. So, for example, Dr. Edwin Porras from Fantasy Points, he's also a trainer for the Twins or something. Follow him on Twitter because he gives great injury analysis, and he's not the only one. There's a few more on Twitter. You can go and find them. He's one that I particularly like, but I follow a few of them, and they are all basically on consensus that Breece Hall is going to be fine for this next season, simply because his ACL injury was a singular ligament, where Javonte Williams, on the other hand, who's priced down in the 8th round, which I still think is just a tad high, he had a multi-ligament injury. I think possibly meniscus was involved, and there are differences between those two, right? J.K. Dobbins is an example last year where he had a multi-ligament injury. I mean, it was at training camp from the previous year, so he should have been absolutely golden. But it obviously took him a while before he was ready. And he still didn't even look ready. He performed towards the end of last year, but even then, he just didn't look the same. So first of all, J.K. Dobbins is a guy I'm kind of in on because I think he's going to be coming back here. It's going to be the nice time, the perfect timetable. But that's why I'm not afraid of Breece Hall. It's a single ligament injury, just the ACL, and he should come back and he should play well because we saw him play well last year when teams didn't have to worry about the Jets throwing the football, right? Breece Hall was absolutely fantastic. And guess what? He went from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. And I know we shouldn't necessarily. I know it sounds weird to necessarily equate, running back success with, a new quarterback, but I mean, this team was very, very good last year. They did not have to give up much for Rodgers. Still kept a first round pick this year. Spent it on a pass rusher. Insane. But if, Mekhi Becton is, coming back, if they can be healthy on the offensive line, this offense should absolutely explode. Every single time a quarterback changes teams, right, we tend to under value how much change that quarterback can bring. Now, I think people are maybe feeling the burn from Russell Wilson last year, right? Like, I get Russell Wilson, new quarterback on a new team, right? But if you truly looked at that system as a whole, you would understand that it was not going to be that great for Russell Wilson. Like, I thought it was going to be fine, but I didn't think it was going to be fantastic for the Broncos, right? Like, their wide receiver room has been overrated for a long time. Honestly, just because Courtland Sutton just got hurt, like, really bad. The offensive line wasn't that great. I think, were they starting Melvin Gordon, or was Javonte a big pick last year? Hackett turned out to be not that great as a head coach. So it's not that shocking, that Russell Wilson was bad. But think about 2 years ago when Matthew Stafford leaves Detroit, a middling Detroit team, probably a worse than middling Detroit team, and goes to LA with Sean McVay and Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and, all these weapons that he has available to him. Rodgers is going from Green Bay without Davante Adams, and the jokes have always been they have no wide receivers other than Davante Adams, right? Sure, he had Christian Watson, but okay. Banged up Romeo Doubs all year. Randall Cobb. No Tunyon. So Rodgers now goes to the Jets with Garrett Wilson, a top 10 pick at wide receiver, and looked the part last year. He's bringing his buddy Lazard. He's got Corey Davis as the wide receiver 3, which is just insane. He's got a couple tight ends to work with. The offense should be immediately better. He gets his offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, who they obviously work well together, So all of a sudden, to me, Rodgers, in round 10 is pretty decent price, especially considering after back-to-back MVPs and on, a not so great Packers team that lost Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers was going in the where was he? In the 10th round. Or is this the 9th? This is the 9th round. So here's Rodgers in the 9th round. Last year, this is oh no, I'm sorry, this is wrong. This is wrong. Hold please. As of August 30th, here he is, Rodgers, 10th round. Okay, so the 4th pick in the 10th round. There he is there. He leaves the crappy Packers. And he then goes to the Jets, and here he is as the 2nd pick in the 10th round. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So Rodgers and Breece Hall for sure are guys I'm going to try to be in on, and I've been leaving a lot of drafts with Breece Hall. Another example I can think of is Saquon. If he didn't have the fluke ankle injury, he would have been fine at like he was like RB9 at the time and would have been getting better as the season went on. And who knows, maybe this, ACL for Hall, and coming back, maybe that could make him more susceptible to another type of injury. But I don't think there's a lot of hard data that supports that notion. So I'm going to choose to not go with my assumption there. Remember, I'm not a medical expert. Okay. But I've been leaving a lot of drafts with Breece Hall, and he's going as the 1. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's going as the RB10. So to me, he's got a great shot at being a top 10 running back, and I get to pay for that as the 10, as the RB10. Another example of systems here, especially systems changing from one year to the next. Mark Andrews also going in the 3rd round. When compared to last year, as of August at August 30th, he was going in the 2nd round right there, dropping almost a full round there. All of a sudden, Lamar Jackson is back, should be healthy. They add Zay Flowers, they add OBJ, and they get Todd Monken as their new offensive coordinator. And if you know anything about Todd Monken, he was the Tampa Bay offensive coordinator when Jameis was going off in fantasy because they were so aggressive. He then goes to Georgia, where they do pretty damn well the last few years. And now he gets to work with Lamar Jackson, one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. And Mark Andrews is ADP, even though the Ravens are probably going to throw more and be more successful at throwing more. Mark Andrews is in the 3rd round. He's dropped a full round compared to last year's price. I understand people got burned because they went for Mark Andrews in the 2nd round because they thought he was going to be the elite tight end. He didn't have that great of a year. It wasn't that great of a year for the Ravens in general, but I think things can turn around for Mark Andrews there. Just I'm buying into the system and his part within the system. They should be very successful. I'm also treating this the same way with Kyle Pitts. I know Desmond Ridder is, might not be that great, but he has to at least be better than Marcus Mariota, possibly. But Marcus Mariota was like really, really bad, and all Desmond Ridder has to do is just be serviceable, and Kyle Pitts, I think, is going to smash this ADP. One of the reasons why I was in on the Eagles last year was because they had the easiest schedule of any team, along with the addition of talent and all that stuff. Now, the Falcons are have one of the easiest schedules. Could be the fact that they play the NFC South, but they should be in reasonable situations in games. And if Ridder can get it up to even league average, Pitts should be really, really valuable. I feel the same way about Drake London. To me, this target tree, even with the addition of Bijan Robinson, is pretty is not that crowded. I think the target tree is pretty condensed between it's going to be London and Pitts, pick one, and Bijan. Some of these other players will probably get looks, but I feel confident enough, especially with what Pitts's target share was like last year. I feel really confident in his ability to succeed, and his ADP's never been lower. Never been lower. I mean, I think people are going to catch on, so I'm just trying to get as much Pitts as possible. But last year, where was Pitts at? He was, I think he was 3rd round. He's dropped double his ADP, and the situation has only gotten better. The situation has only gotten better. The system has only gotten better, and the situation has only gotten better. The Falcons have still invested in the offensive line. They got Bijan Robinson. They should have some sort of upgrade at quarterback. How much of an upgrade, I don't know, but any upgrade is good, especially for what this guy can do and his price now. Another one here, Michael Pittman, a guy that was really, really, hyped coming into last year, going in the 3rd round. He's dropped down to the 5th round just compared to last year. And also looking at ADP that I collected on February 17th. Now, this is decently before the draft. And unfortunately, I didn't take any ADP, make any ADP draft boards in between these two time slots. But here's Michael Pittman at, oh, he was in the 5th round. Here he is in the 5th round. Okay. Now, this is after a disappointing season with some of, you know, on a team with some of the worst quarterback play you saw all year. And that's with the Jets and Zach Wilson. Okay. And so you're expecting, okay, what's going to happen? You know, maybe the Colts get a quarterback, but we don't know what the quarterback situation is like there. First of all, you have an offensive coordinator change. So that could be beneficial here, especially because it wasn't Frank Reich really at all last year. It was more Jeff fucking Saturday. Sorry. And so, you know, you get an upgrade in offensive coordinator or offensive play caller, hopefully. And then you're waiting to see what happens at quarterback. Okay, well, here comes Anthony Richardson, who, by the way, systems, you know, I don't think Anthony Richardson has come. I don't think any other quarterback is in a better situation than Anthony Richardson, and especially over the last few years, Anthony Richardson is probably other than Trey Lance, Anthony Richardson is falling into one of the better systems as a rookie. Let me get to Richardson here in a second, but Pittman, staying on Pittman. Okay, so now his ADP has fallen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spots total from the first pick in the 5th round to now the 7th pick. I guess that's 6 spots. Okay, he gets any quarterback that's reasonable, and Pittman should be a nice ADP beater, I think. But sticking within the systems, okay, Anthony Richardson falls into an offensive mind that's going to give him an opportunity, an offensive mind that worked with Jalen Hurts. Now he gets to work with a quarterback who physically is unlike any other human on the planet. He proved that at the combine, and we were already kind of expecting it on tape. The dude is unbelievable with his legs, okay? Know your league, right? Another one of our fantasy football fundamentals. Know your league. Rushing stats are huge, and you don't have to be great as a passer if you're really good as a runner in order to get fantasy points and to be an elite fantasy quarterback. I think Richardson has that ability. The Colts also have a very easy schedule. Let's look at the system, okay? The offensive line, yes, maybe that could have been a little bit more improved, but I think they believe in the guys that they have, and I think with the offense that they're going to run, especially with Richardson, some of the offensive line issues might be able to be masked. Just depends on how they, deploy them and what their strengths are. That is, granted, not the greatest, but not many quarterbacks come into a first year with a great offensive line. What I really like is they've got Michael Pittman. Okay, he's a great X. They've got Alec Pierce, who's going to play the Z. He's a great guy to stretch the field. And then they go and they get this guy right here, Josh Downs. Love me some Josh Downs simply because of how I think he fits within the system. He's a great slot. They've got a lot of weapons at tight end. I think they just have a team that's physically unlike a lot of other teams. You know, Jelani Woods, their tight ends are so athletic. It's crazy. And the Colts are big believers in athletic teams. They've got Jonathan Taylor. This is an offensive system that has some juice. With an offensive coordinator that has some juice. So I'm really, really in on Anthony Richardson. The price has really, really risen. You should have been getting him way, way earlier before the draft. But I'm honestly still okay with this. Another guy, and I'm just kind of seeing it right now, another guy that you can argue his offensive system got better is Tua. I mean, they go and just sign Isaiah Wynn recently. They got Teron Armstead last year. They went and got A-Chain. The offensive, Mike McDaniel. I mean, this offensive system is gnarly, and we saw that last year, and we should continue to see that with Tua. So he's a guy I like here. A lot of these mid-round quarterbacks I like. Danny Dimes, his system improved. They went and got more offensive linemen. They went and got more wide receivers, right? They have so many wide receivers, and some people, and then they got Darren Waller, right? Another guy kind of like down at his ADP. But Danny Dimes is an interesting one to me simply because we've seen him move. We've seen him run the ball, whether it's out of necessity by design by Dable, or if it's like to extend the play, right? So I really like Danny Dimes at his ADP simply because we've seen it already, and his system improved. That the same could be the same could be said about Geno Smith, and I just do not understand how to approach these quarterbacks here, because you've got so many to me where the system has improved. Danny Dimes, Tua, Cousins' system even technically improved. Geno Smith for sure. They went and got JSN. Rodgers is on a new team. I think some of these quarterbacks in this zone are really, really, really interesting, and it's because of their systems. And the last absolute stark example, and you can see if you watch my videos last year, I've only got a few money players towards the end, and one of them is Trey freaking Lance. This guy has evidently made a step. I was buying in on him earlier in the year simply because I didn't think Purdy was going to be fully healthy until like week 1, and so Lance would have to step up on convincing the coaching staff that he's the right guy. And all Lance has to do is just he just has to play semi well and show off with his legs, and I think it could be explosive. And talk about the system around him. I mean, the offensive line has been what it's been. It's been successful. Trent Williams kind of leading the helm there, but they've got George Kittle, they've got Ayuk, they've got Debo, they've also got Christian McCaffrey. So now just good luck trying to defend all of that. I saw a stat the other day on Twitter. I don't remember who it was, but Lance had an 1,100 yard rushing season in college. I know he played for North Dakota State, but that's the kind of physical ability he has. And just to kind of hedge my bets here, I'm in on Purdy. I'm in on Purdy too. I'm not going to be this guy where like I don't think he's that good. I've been heavy on Lance, and so now Purdy's kind of jumping in and souring things for me a little bit. But I'm not just going to like ignore the fact that Purdy was really, really good. And was successful with the Niners. And so not only that, but Darnold is on here somewhere. Darnold is probably my favorite because he's the cheapest, and I think he was very good in Carolina last year in the game towards the end of the year in the games he started, and I'm in on Darnold too. I mean, I did a best ball draft. I took I think actually the last video I did, I cut it early, and the last few picks I did Lance, Purdy, and Darnold. I had all three paired with like CMC and maybe Kittle or Ayuk or something like that. I'm about it, and that's simply because the system is really, really good. It's the same reason that Mahomes is successful. Right? Like, of course, Mahomes is Mahomes, but he's also got Andy Reid, probably the best offensive mind in the NFL right now. And he's also got a great offensive line, and he's also got some good weapons, right? He's got Kelsey and some other wide receivers, and they just work as an offense. And so I'm in on Lance, I'm in on Purdy, and I'm in on a lot of the quarterbacks that I've talked about and a lot of the players that I've highlighted here simply because the systems have changed. People don't understand how they've changed, number one. Or are not valuing not valuing the effect that these changes have. In a system, when one part changes, the rest of the system changes. And so when we have these new incoming pieces that actually fit and make the system more efficient, I think it can lead us to fantasy success if we invest in some of the other pieces of that system. If you are even watching up to this point, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to keep trying to do videos here. I'm in a bunch of slow drafts right now for the first puppy. It's honestly pretty cool. If you like drafting, just enter like 10 puppy drafts, 10 puppy slow drafts, and like just every few hours you're going to have, a pick to have. And it kind of helps if you just take the guys, in your process, right? Take the guys that you're you're in your process with. I've got a lot of guys that I kind of like the prices at, and that's just because of recent drafts done, and obviously with the 3 dimensions of fantasy football here, we hope to have that process be as sound as possible. Once again, thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon. This has been Fantasy Football Science with DLP.